So this is tropical walnut. While it grows mainly in Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia, it's actually related to the American black walnut that you might be most familiar with. Now they're both very dark woods, with tropical walnut being just a shade or two darker. Today I'm going to share some information on how well this wood machines and a few tips on how to make a really nice finish in this wood. When you get up close to tropical walnut, you'll notice some consistency here in both how straight the grain is and in the color. So you'll almost never find pale sapwood in tropical walnut, and you won't get the curl and the swirling and irregular grain that you're going to find in something like American black walnut. It's still great to work with, and it finishes beautifully. This wood machines pretty easily, so your usual woodworking blades and cutters, they'll do just fine. For example, take a look at the edge left by this 60-tooth crosscut blade. But the same goes for routing. This is a 3/8" carbide-tipped roundover bit. So now hopefully you can see that this wood is not too hard and yet not too soft, and that it machines really quite well. So next, let's just take a look at a few finishes that you can do that really make this wood look great. So look at these samples I finished, each one with a different product, yet the results are quite similar. They're just sanded to 220 grit and then finished with a protective top coat. It's a gel polyurethane wiped on, wiped off. 3 coats of spray lacquer. And this third one has a water-based acrylic spray finish on there. Now all of these, again, are very simple, really easy to do, so I'm not going to really demonstrate how those go on. You just follow the directions on the can and you're off and running. What I will demonstrate though is the value of grain filling before you put on these top coats. Check this out. So when you fill the grain in wood, you get 2 really nice benefits. Number 1, the pores get filled with material and therefore your top coat finish goes on smooth as glass. Number 2 is because grain fillers apply a little bit of color to the pores of the wood, you add a little bit of contrast, a little bit more dimension to your final piece, and you end up with a really, really nice look. So in this first method, we're going to apply Danish oil and then wet sand it in. And that means you apply oil to the surface and then take some wet dry sandpaper and sand it while the oil is wet. And here's what's happening. As you sand, the wood dust mixes with the oil and creates a paste. And as you sand, that paste gets packed into the pores and fills the grain. Now it doesn't take much sanding at all, but once you're done, you want to probably apply just a little bit of oil once again to the top, wait about 10 minutes, and come back with another clean rag, and wipe it off going across the grain. And after you wipe it off, you let it dry overnight. And you'll see that the grain has started to get nicely filled, but it probably needs a little bit more, so you sand it a little bit with some fine grit paper and redo that process. And after about 10 minutes, wipe off the excess oil going across the grain and then let it dry again overnight. And now that board is perfectly filled and ready for a protective top coat. We start once again with some fine grit sandpaper to get it good and smooth. Then we move on to a de-wax shellac sealer, apply a couple coats of that. And then finally, you shoot some spray lacquer, buff it out, and you end up with a perfectly glass smooth finish. And here's another way to fill grain and get a really nice smooth finish. Instead of wet sanding Danish oil, apply a wood grain filler. The application process is just slightly different, but the end result is virtually the same. Wood grain filler is an oil-based product that's pale in color. So what you do is you add a little bit of stain to color it exactly the way that you want. And today I'm just using Old Master's Spanish Oak just to make it really dark. You mix it 2 parts filler to 1 part stain, and then apply it to your board. You can use a brush, cloth, or, like I'm demonstrating here, a scraper. Work it in going with the grain. Wait a few minutes and then scrape it off going across the grain. And then you may want to use a cloth or a rag to wipe off any other residue that's left on the surface, and then let this dry for a few hours after this. And after 4 hours, it's time to sand this down a little bit. So I'm wiping it with some mineral spirits and then just sanding with 220 grit sandpaper. The reason for the sanding here is because a little bit of stain in the wood filler actually colors the wood a little bit. So I'm sanding it here just to pull that off, but this step is totally optional. Another way to have done this is to put down a wash coat before the wood filler, and that helps keep the color off of the wood as well. And here's a comparison. Alright, this board on the left has no filler, it's just been sanded. The board on the right is the one we just filled. So when you get up close, you can see how the filler has colored in the pores real nicely and added a little bit of contrast to the wood. Next step is to add a couple coats of sealer. In this case, that's Zinsser's Seal Coat, which is a de-wax shellac and very easy to use. You let that dry for 10 or 15 minutes and then sand it down a little bit. And now that this board is good and smooth, it's time to put on the final top coat, in which this case is gel polyurethane. And this really couldn't be any easier to apply. You just wipe it on, you wipe it off, and as you wipe it off, you're kind of buffing it smooth. And then it needs to dry for at least 6 hours, and then you can recoat it again. And what you'll end up with is a very nice, smooth, clean finish. So you might be wondering which grain filling method works the best. Well, they really come out about the same, only the process is different. So, effectively, choose whichever method appeals to you more. So with that, I hope you did learn something good here today. If you have any questions, just ask. Thanks for watching.